Hey guys, I'm Chris Buck and a very warm welcome to Friday Fretworks. And this week we're taking a look at the Sunburst Gibson Les Paul from 1960. So if you've been watching Friday Fretworks for any length of time, you'll probably be aware by now that I'm a little bit of a burst fanatic. By burst, of course, mean Sunburst Les Paul standards produced between 1958 and 1960. Guitars that, ironically, now amongst the most consistently valuable guitars in the world, yet at the time failed to meet Gibson's expectations, and as such it's estimated that in those 3 years only around 1,500 guitars were ever made, and as the old adage goes, only 2,000 still remain. Now, despite this lacklustre response at the time, it's fair to say that Gibson didn't go down without a fight, and in those 3 years they implemented increasingly drastic changes to the Les Paul to try and turn around its fortunes, and it's from that last era of change, mid-1960, that today's guitar comes from. Ultimately, all of these changes were to no avail because in late 1960 Gibson discontinued the Les Paul Standard to be replaced by the new Les Paul Standard, or what we now think of as the Gibson SG, and ultimately it would take the likes of Eric Clapton, Peter Green, Mike Bloomfield and of course Keith Richards playing those coveted bursts to instigate Gibson reissuing the Les Paul in 1968. Now, I don't think it's unfair to say that in the burst world, 1959 is very much seen as a landmark year, kind of pinnacle of burst specs, if you will. Bigger frets than a 58, but with a slightly smaller, more cultured neck profile. And of course, with those aniline dyes that were so prone to fading in natural light, giving each guitar a unique, distinctive colour and finish. And as much as that vulnerability to the elements is celebrated and recreated to a large degree today, it's important to remember that at the time this was very much seen as a manufacturing flaw, with guitars sometimes fading as quickly as only up to 1 or 2 weeks having been spent in a guitar shop window, leading to some pretty distinctive wear patterns. Now, one particularly notable example, of course, being Ed King's RedEye, as its new owner Jason Isbell explains here.
So do they know how this discoloration came to be?
Yes, that was originally, the red all the way around,
right.
And then this is where the tag was hanging in the window. And
that's
so the UV light faded that aniline dye and took the red out of most of the 58 and 59 Les Pauls. But in 60 they started going to the tomato soup color, which didn't fade, that darker red.
Right. As Jason touched upon there, in mid-1960, in response to criticism from both dealers and players, Gibson changed the composition of their dye to something that wouldn't fade quite so quickly, or at all, as it turned out, leading to what we now think of as, colloquially, tomato soup bursts. And that's where today's guitar, a 1960 Les Paul Standard, for sale at ATB Guitars in Gloucestershire in the UK for a cool £185,000, in case you're interested, comes into play. Now, it's hard to conclusively say given the 58 and 59's propensity for fading, but it's my suspicion that these 60 bursts were painted a much more vivid shade of cherry or red than those earlier bursts ever were. Pretty much the most kind of immaculately preserved bursts I've ever played. A 59 called the Minnesota still retained pretty much all of its colour, but is still an infinitely darker shade of red than this 1960 counterpart. Gibson also introduced a short neck tenon, basically how the neck connects to the body, replaced the earlier bell-style knobs with reflector knobs, and arguably the biggest change of all, reduced the neck profile pretty drastically, so it felt much flatter, much slimmer, more blade-like in the hand. Now, all of these changes combined, I don't think it's unfair to say, give the 1960 Les Paul Standard the reputation of being almost the runt of the burst litter. But unsurprisingly, in recent years, it's found favour with one Joe Bonamassa, who, with the Raging Cajun, the Runt, and Johnny B, has owned at least 3 1960 Les Paul Standards that we know of, which, as you can imagine, has done the reputation absolutely no harm.
This guitar is a 1960, late 1960. It is 08145.
Total blade neck on this one.
Not
version
as
3.
bad as the Australian guitar that I have, but it's a typical
Yeah,
1960s.
just-
I like tomato soup guitars. I
Yeah.
like the Sunburst because when you want to buy a Sunburst Les Paul, you want them Sunburst. And I like 60s because they have a little shorter neck tenon. They tend to be biters, not moaners, and meaning that they're brighter and they're punchier, so they cut through. It's like, so I just like 60s, and they're cool. And this is one of the coolest because of the name.
So what about this guitar? Now, the first thing I noticed upon opening the case was, of course, the top, which is absolutely incredible. Arguably one of the most eye-catching tops I've ever seen on a Les Paul, never mind a burst. Beautifully quilted, but with a couple of subtle bits of flame showing through here and there. It really is one of those tops that looks markedly different from whichever angle you look at it. It's been refretted with a set of what appear to be railway sleepers at some point, but they are very comfortable, and as much as the neck profile is different from what I'm accustomed to with a Les Paul, it is markedly slimmer. Ultimately, it doesn't take too long to get your head around, and almost feels kind of akin to a couple of early 60s 335s that I've played. It comes with its original case, and despite the set of DiMarzios having been in there at some point in its history, now comes with its original PAFs, which are beautifully balanced and sound exactly as I've come to expect from a burst. Top end, clarity, articulation, but with that mid-range snarl and bark that really do make these such versatile, fantastic sounding guitars. Whether or not the shorter neck tenon really does give it a snappier, more aggressive tone, it's hard to say without putting it side by side with a 59, but if there's one man who would know of these idiosyncrasies, having played arguably more bursts than anyone else, I would imagine, it's Joe Bonamassa, so I will defer to his expert opinion on this one. Either way, I'm going to play you out now, but if you have 185 grand burning a hole in your pocket, I do know of a nice Les Paul going. It even comes with a case. As ever, I'm Chris Buck. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe, hit the bell icon if you haven't already, and I shall see you next week for another episode of Friday Fretworks. Cheers, guys. Take care. I'll see you soon.
Mm-hmm.